Hello, good day to one and all. This is Miss A. Krishna Sundar, Assistant Professor, Department of English, KAHM Unity Women's College, Mancheri. Today we are moving on to the second part of Aristotle and his Poetics. We had already gone through the introduction as well as the chapters from 1 to 4 in the first part of the video lecture. So here we go from chapter 5 to 10. So in the last chapter, that is chapter 4, we had already discussed how tragedy and comedy evolved. Tragedy evolved through the topics written by the serious writers who wrote about serious topics, and they were mostly in praise of gods like hymns, and they slowly moved into the form of epics, and these epics got transformed into tragedy. Similarly, in the case of comedy, some writers wrote about frivolous or light themes. They became satires, and in due course, they transformed into the genre called comedy. So this was what we discussed in chapter 4. So here we go with chapter 5. Now in chapter 5, Aristotle gives the definition of the ridiculous. At the same time, he also discusses the difference between an epic and a tragedy. As mentioned before, most of the chapters of Poetics are totally disconnected. And on many occasions, Aristotle actually takes a total digression from the topics that he had been discussing. So now he talks about the ridiculous. Now this ridiculous is directly connected with comedy. Now Aristotle says that the ridiculous means they are characters of a lower type. And by the term ridiculous, he describes that it is not bad or morally bad. So they are just a lower category of characters, but that doesn't mean that they are negative characters. The only intention of the characters here would be to evoke laughter. And this is not going to cause pain or harm to anyone else. So they belong to a specific category, and the main intention is to evoke laughter. Now, talking about ridiculous in a positive light, he then moves on to discuss the topics epic and tragedy. He says that tragedy evolved from epic, but still there are certain similarities that they have got, but at the same time some distinctions, or as you can see, some kind of differences. Now, both epic and tragedy, they contain serious characters. So mostly grand and elevated style which is seen in epic and tragedy. If you look at the ancient Greek works, let it be an epic or a tragedy, most of them wrote about gods and goddesses, kings and queens, and even nobles. So that is why we say epics and tragedies always had an elevated style, a grand style. Now coming to the differences, epic is always narrative, but at the same time a tragedy is always dramatic. Now the difference here is that narrative means it is always moving on the plane of narration, just like telling a story. But on the other hand, tragedy is always dramatic. Dramatic means it represents people in action. So it speaks about, or it showcases the action of the people and their experiences. So epic is narrative, but tragedy is dramatic. Now, epic uses only heroic meter, but any meter can be used for a tragedy. Now, an epic is longer and unlimited, and that is why you can see some epics are very, very, very long. If you start reading them, it might take years to complete it. For example, if you take the books like Mahabharata and Ramayana, they are considered as epics. So they are long. At the same time, their scope is unlimited. It can extend to any number of pages. but tragedy is limited. Now, tragedy is limited because Aristotle sets a basic rule for the performance of a tragedy. Now, Aristotle says that a tragedy should actually be limited, which is the single circuit of the sun. Now, the single circuit of the sun means 24 hours, that is one single day. Now, Aristotle says the storyline of a tragedy should happen within the context of one single day, because that gives a unity of action. So, if you look at epic, epic is not limited by time and space. It can extend to any length, but a tragedy is limited. It cannot extend like an epic. It should be something like the single circuit of the sun, as Aristotle discusses. Now, this is what Aristotle calls as the unity of action. Now, as you all know, you might have heard about the three unities in a drama. Now, the three unities are actually unity of time, unity of place, and unity of action. Now, unity of time means this should actually happen within one single circuit of the sun. Unity of place means the entire story should take place from one single location. The change of scenes, the change of locations will actually reduce the effect of the play. This was what Aristotle believed in. And then comes unity of action. Now, unity of action means the entire actions or the entire sequences within the play should be concentrated on the main theme. It should not deviate from the main theme. It should not digress. So, unity of time, unity of place, and unity of action, these three are considered as the three unities. But Aristotle speaks only about unity of action within his Poetics, and he never talks about unity of time or unity of place. So we have to come to the conclusion that maybe these two unities, unity of time or unity of place, could be something which would have been invented by someone else in a later stage. So moving on to the next chapter. Chapter number 6, which gives the definition of tragedy and the different parts of tragedy. Now, chapter 6 in Poetics is considered as the most important chapter. This is considered to be the core chapter of Poetics because this is a chapter in which Aristotle is giving a clear-cut definition of tragedy. So I'm going to take you towards a definition of tragedy. This is how Aristotle defines tragedy. Tragedy is an imitation of an action. We have already discussed imitation in the very first chapter. So tragedy is an imitation of an action that is serious, complete, and of certain magnitude. Magnitude is a size. In language, embellished. Embellished means something that is very flowery in its nature, very elevated kind of language. In language, embellished with each kind of artistic ornament in the form of action, not of narrative. Remember the difference between epic and tragedy. Epic is narrative, but tragedy is dramatic. So that is how it is written like this, in the form of action, not of narrative, with incidents arousing pity and fear, wherewith to accomplish its catharsis of such emotions. I'm sure you might have heard of the term catharsis. Now, catharsis is actually the purgation of emotion, which means when you watch a play or when you watch a movie, you get some kind of a satisfaction when you come out of the theater. Now, this satisfaction is known as catharsis, which is actually the purgation of emotion. So, just remember the main terms when you define tragedy, because this is something which you have to learn, the definition of tragedy. Imitation of serious action, complete, certain magnitude. I'm just pinpointing the terms, the main terms, also main terms here. You have to connect this and bring out the definition. Certain magnitude, language embellished, melody and poetic diction, dramatic, pity and fear, catharsis. So these are the terms which are used in the definition of tragedy. Now coming to the last part, catharsis. Now catharsis is actually the purgation of emotions. Purgation of emotion means you are relieving, you're venting out your emotions so that there is a kind of satisfaction which is coming to you. And that is why when we watch certain movies, now I'm giving you examples from movies because movie is an extension of a play or a drama. So if you go to a theater and watch a movie, for example, let it be a tragedy, a tragic movie, you come out of the theater, sometimes you cry, you're having a heavy heart and you come out of the theater, but there is some kind of a satisfaction that you would be experiencing, and this satisfaction is known as catharsis. Now Plato was totally against this catharsis. Now Plato said that this kind of an art which is giving out catharsis is in fact a dangerous excitement. So Plato was totally against this purgation of emotion because Plato believed that if you start crying and spending your emotions through a play or through a movie, now there were no movies at the time of Plato. I'm just telling this to make you understand the concept. Okay, suppose if a movie makes you cry, or suppose if a drama makes you cry, Plato believes that it is going to be dangerous in your life. Because Plato suggested that if you're going to cry for a drama, what will happen if a real tragedy happens in your own life? You will not be able to control it. It will go beyond your control. And because of that, he said that this is a dangerous game. He was totally against this. But his student Aristotle had a totally different notion. Aristotle says that this is a very good clearance of emotions. He says, if you go and watch a play which is really tragic, you cry a lot, you come back home with a heavy heart. But Aristotle says that when you get rid of all these emotions, when you keep crying for some time, your mind is cleared. This is how Aristotle sees it. Aristotle says that when you cry a lot, then you will be in peace of mind, all passions spent. So he considers it as a purgation, something like a good riddance of emotions, a good clearance of emotions. So Plato was against it, but Aristotle said that it was pleasurable and beneficial. Now, just to make you understand, I'll be quoting one example. A number of years back, maybe 1 or 2 decades back, there was a Malayalam movie which got released, and the name of the movie was Akashadud. I don't know how many of you might have watched this movie. I remember this was a movie which came into theaters while I was a school student. And I had seen a number of people going and watching this movie and coming back with tears in their eyes, because it is said that anyone who watched this movie would definitely cry because it was so much tragic in nature. So I've seen so many people going back to theaters again and again and watching the very same movie again and again. So why is this happening? If a movie can only give you tears, why do you want to watch that movie again? Even if you feel like watching it again, there is something pleasurable and beneficial happening there. So this is what Aristotle suggested. So now comes the next part, the formative parts of a tragedy. So a tragedy has got 6 important parts. So let's go through the 6 important parts. So again, please remember the 6 parts of a tragedy because this is a very important segment in Aristotle's Poetics. And not just Aristotle's Poetics. If you're going to learn any kind of play or if you're going to enact any kind of drama, this will definitely help you. So a tragedy consists of 6 parts. The most important one is plot, then comes character, thought, diction, spectacle, and melody. So these are the 6 important parts of a tragedy. And please remember, a tragedy is always equated with its performance. A tragedy means it is a performance. something which has to be staged. And that is why melody, spectacle, these terms are all coming. When you just read a play, these things will not be there because you can't see the settings, you cannot see the costumes, you cannot see how the light reflection happens. So it's just the reading part, the drama. But a tragedy is often meant to be showcased as a performance, and that is why spectacle and melody, they too become a part of it. Now, we would be concentrating on plot construction from now on and the unity of action. So before that, I just want you to understand the difference between plot and story. We often use them in a synonymous manner. We interchange these terms and we use them like plot and story. What is the difference between plot and story? They are two different terms and definitely they have two different meanings. Now, story means the number of incidents or the series of incidents which are happening. Now, plot means it is the arrangement of incidents. So there is a lot of difference here. Story is just the incidents, but plot is the arrangement of incidents. And the beauty of a drama or the beauty of a movie lies in this arrangement of incidents, not in the story. The beauty of a work always lies in the way in which it has been arranged. Now, the best example that I can tell you would be the movie Titanic. If you look at the movie Titanic, what is the story? The story goes like this. A huge ship was built and people travel in that ship, but finally the ship hits an iceberg and then the problem begins. Now in between you have a love story. Now this is actually the storyline. But look at the plot. Now plot is the arrangement of these incidents. How does plot work here? Now the director of the movie is James Cameron. Now, James Cameron has actually designed the arrangement of incidents in a different way, which means, how does the movie begin? The movie begins with Rose, played by Kate Winslet, who is a very old lady now. She's around her 80s and 90s when the movie begins. And then it goes like a flashback, right? She starts narrating her story in the ship. So it goes like a flashback. So this is the arrangement that James Cameron had made. So the aspects of flashback or going into the retrospect. Now these are considered as the arrangement done by the director. Now this arrangement is what you call as plot. Now he could have started it in many different ways. So this is actually in the hands of the director. Just like that, in the case of a tragedy or a drama, this plot is in the hands of the playwright or the dramatist. So there is a lot of difference between story and plot. Story is just the events which happened, but plot is actually the arrangement of incidents. Now let's move on to the next chapter. Now this is chapter number 7, which talks about plot construction. Now this chapter is completely about how plot works and the importance of plot in a tragedy. Now plot is considered as a soul of tragedy. So now you understand the importance of plot. Now Aristotle says that plot is the arrangement of incidents. Plot determines the structure of the play. So everything in a tragedy is dependent, not just tragedy, any kind of play is dependent on its plot construction. Now there are some characteristics that he attributes towards plot. Aristotle says that plot must be a whole. A whole means something which has got a beginning, a middle, and an end. So there should be a logical order in which it has to be placed. It begins. Now beginning is actually the exposition. Now beginning means you get to know the characters, you get to know what is a theme or what is a situation. You understand these things. Then it goes to the middle part. Something is happening, some kind of a problem is coming. And the last part, this problem has to be resolved. This is how it works with every drama, every movie. So this beginning, middle, and end should go in a logical order, in a correct patterning, that one event leading to the other. Now this is what you call as having a whole. That's something that is just like a compact kind of thing. The next one is plot must be complete, which means there is a unity of action that he is talking about. It must be complete means it must have a unity, a kind of structure which actually holds everything together. Then plot must be of certain magnitude. Now, magnitude is actually the size. It is actually the quantity and the quality that he is relating to. And he calls this as an organic unity. Now, organic unity means he compares the plot with a living organism. And Aristotle gives a very interesting example. Now, Aristotle asks the readers to think about a very lengthy living organism. Just imagine a living organism which is in the size of kilometers and kilometers. Imagine what happens. If you start watching this organism from one point, you look at this organism and walk the first kilometer, you complete the second kilometer. By the time you reach the tail part of the organism, you might have forgotten the head part of the organism, which means you can remember a thing as a complete thing only if you can see everything in one stretch. Now imagine a living organism which is 2 kilometers in length. By the time you reach the last part, you would have forgotten how it looked like when you began looking at it. So, this is why he says it should be of certain magnitude. Now imagine the contradicting part of it. If you are going to look at a microscopic organism which is very, very, very small in size, it is not going to get registered in your mind. So, too lengthy and too small, both these are not considered as good signs. And that is why he says it should be of a certain magnitude. It should have some kind of an organic unity, just like a living organism. Plots can be either simple or complex. Now, these are the two types of plot constructions. It can be a simple plot or it can be a complex plot. I'm not discussing simple and complex plot now because we have another detailed chapter for that. We'll discuss it in the coming chapter. Now, the beauty of the plot lies in the proper relation between whole and its parts, which means there should be some kind of a connection, an interconnectedness which should be there. And a play should always be well proportional. This is what he says. The size, the quantity, the quality, it should be well proportional. Only then people can enjoy it. So this is about plot construction. Chapter 8 talks about the unity of the plot. Now, unity of the plot is actually unity of action. Now, unity of action is definitely the hero's action, the only necessary requirement within the play. The writer should make a proper selection of events. Now, what is Aristotle meaning by this? The writer should make a proper selection of events. Now, let's take the very same example of the movie Titanic. If you look at the movie Titanic, we see Rose and Jack meeting from the ship. They fall in love with each other, and this is how the story begins. Now, if you look at the storyline, there are so many other things which are not coming in the movie. For example, the childhood days of Jack, the childhood days of Rose. Okay, in which school did they study, or what were these people doing as children? James Cameron is not showing any of these things. So it is in the assumption that the movie begins when these people are adults. So their childhood is completely ignored in the movie. Now, the childhood is completely ignored because it is not catering to the main theme of the movie Titanic. So this is why we say the writer should make a proper selection of events. Just because the hero is a hero, the writer needn't tell everything about the hero. There are so many things about the hero, but all these things need not be told in the movie. Only those things which are pertaining to the main theme of the movie need to be told. So this is why we say the writer should make a proper selection of events, only the necessary action. unity of plot should be organic. It should be like a living organism. So this is a very same point which we had already discussed. The unity of the plot means it shouldn't be too small or it shouldn't be too large. It has to be in a compact size. Nothing should be superfluous. Nothing should be like an extra element of the main theme. Everything should relate with the same theme. Unity of time and unity of place derived later by other critics. So it is only unity of action that Aristotle talks about. So as mentioned before, unity of time and unity of place could have been the invention of some other writers in a later stage. So moving on to the next part, this is chapter 9 with poetry and history. So Aristotle here totally moves away from the structural description and now he goes to compare poetry and history, and he states that poetry is 1,000 times better than history. Now poetry always is about what might happen or what may happen, so that is futuristic. So a poetry is always determined by probability and necessity, because a poet always writes about what can happen or what might happen. But all said and done, it should consist of some kind of a universal aspect. Now what is universality? Now universality is something where every single person can identify with. For example, if you look at Western culture, Eastern culture, there are lots of differences. If you look at the foreign countries and if you compare it with India, there are lots of differences, structural differences, religious differences, cultural differences, geographical differences. But despite all these differences, there are certain elements which can relate with every human being in this world. For example, certain emotions like love, romance, again, death, happiness. These are some of the emotions that every person in every country, in every part of the world can relate with. So this is what you call as having a universality. So poetry is all about universality, which means any person can identify with it. But history recounts what had already happened. So history is about past. It is not giving you anything new, it is just describing what already happened. The Greek word for poet is actually maker, and the poet creates plots and not stories. So Aristotle once again stresses on the fact how ordering and selection is very important in the case of a poet. And he also says that poetry is not photographic realism. And that is why Plato was not very happy with poetry, because Plato said that poetry is dangerous, because poetry is all about imagination and there is no reason coming in. This was what Plato had in his mind. So poetry is not photographic realism, we all know that. It's more about the future, what might happen, or in a way possibilities and probabilities. So what is imitated is a conception of life and not real life. So a slice of life is what you can see in poems. And therefore Aristotle says poetry is far more philosophical than history, and poetry is far more superior than history. Now he moves on to chapter 10 with the different kinds of plots. So again, the comparison between poetry and history was actually a digression from the plot discussion. So he gets back to this plot discussion and now he talks about simple plot and complex plot. So before defining these two terms, I want you to look at this picture. This is Freytag's pyramid. Now this is actually the structure of any play or a movie. It begins with an introduction, an exposition, which means you get to know the characters, you get to know the location where the story is happening, or what is going now. We understand the basic elements within the play or the movie. And now the movie progresses slowly, and now there is a rising action. You call this as a rising action, which means the movie is progressing, and then comes some kind of a complication, and this complication reaches its climax. So a huge problem is happening here. And then comes denouement. Now denouement means it is a falling action, which means now this problem has to be resolved. There is a problem here. Now this is a peak. There is a problem, and in most cases the movies will have an interval at this point, right, so that the audience would be filled with curiosity in their mind. Now after this there is a denouement, which is a falling action, and finally some kind of a solution would come for the problem. So there is a resolution, and finally the play comes to an end, or the movie comes to an end. So this is a normal structure of any play or any movie. So now let's get into simple plot and complex plot. So simple plot means a plot which moves forward continuously and uniformly towards the catastrophe. So that is a destructive phase. So there is nothing like, as you call, as twists and turns. It's a very linear kind of thing. Now the best example here would be a love story. Like maybe there is a guy, for example, let's move into an old Malayalam movie, Aniyati Pravu. I'm sure you might have heard of this name. At least the Malayalam viewers would know about this. This is a Malayalam movie which was released in the year 1997 or 98, Aniyati Pravu. Now this movie is actually a love story. So there is a guy and a girl, they fall in love with each other. So it moves in a uniform pattern. So let's look at this pyramid structure and let's analyze the movie Aniyati Pravu. So the guy at first the guy walks behind the girl is reluctant to say yes. Now finally the girl says yes, and there is a relationship which is blooming. Now what happens? Finally their parents come to know about this. Okay, they actually elope, they run away from their homes, and this is a climax. Now what will happen? Now as everyone knows, the next phase is how they decide to get separated from each other. They go back to their houses, but finally the families are getting convinced, and finally they agree to the marriage, and at last they get married and they happily lived ever after. So this is a normal kind of a plot, and you call that a simple plot. So there is nothing much happening here. It's just a very normal kind of plot. You call that a simple plot. So no twists, no turns. Now coming to complex plot, as the name suggests, it is more complex. Now a complex plot will have two important segments. Now these are again Greek terms. One is peripeteia and the other one is anagnorisis. So let me introduce to you these terms. Peripeteia is actually the reversal of situations. Suddenly everything changes. That is peripeteia. And the next one is anagnorisis. Anagnorisis means the sudden discovery of truth. You believe that this was the truth, but suddenly everything is altered and you get a new reality. So everything changes. So this is something similar to twists and turns, as you call in the normal language, but in dramatic language, it is known as peripeteia and anagnorisis. Peripeteia is a reversal of situation and anagnorisis is a discovery of truth. So once more, a change of situation from one state of affairs to its exact opposite. So that is peripeteia. So some kind of complexity is coming here. And anagnorisis is a change from ignorance to knowledge, a sudden change from ignorance to knowledge. So maybe you are coming into a closer touch with reality. So you will understand it in a better way when I give you examples. Now peripeteia, so I'm taking one more example from a Malayalam movie. Now this is a 1989 Malayalam movie named Kireedam. Maybe sometimes those who are listening to this might not have been born at that time. Okay, so but I'm sure you would have heard about this name if you are a Malayali. This is a Mohanlal movie. So the title of the movie is Kireedam. I don't know how many of you have watched the story or how many of you know the story. So if you look at this movie, Mohanlal's character is Sethu Madhavan, and Sethu Madhavan is aspiring to become a police officer. He has written some test and is waiting for getting into the post. His father, Achyutan Nair, the role played by Tilagan, he is also a police officer, and the father has a lot of dreams in his son. He is the eldest son. So the story goes in a very normal way, a normal family, happy family, leading a very good life. The father is a police officer. He is waiting for his son to become a police officer. But suddenly what happens here is that in a particular situation, when the son sees his father being attacked by a criminal, in a spur of moment action, his reflex action comes out and he starts thrashing the criminal, and finally he kills the criminal. So it was not a deliberate action, but his intention was only to save his father because the criminal was attacking his father. So that was a very impulsive kind of action. It was not a pre planned action. And Sethu Madhavan is imprisoned after this. So this is the problem that comes in the movie. So a sudden change of situation. The son who was destined to become a police officer is now being branded as a criminal. So this is what you call as the problem. So now how the movie takes this problem. This is what happens in the next phase of the movie. Now another example would be Titanic. As you all know, Titanic, the great ship, started its voyage, and half the way as it reaches amidst the ocean, it gets struck with an iceberg. And once when it gets struck with the iceberg, the problem is established. So sudden reversal of situation because nobody thought that Titanic is going to sink. But water gets into the ship. Many people start dying. Some of them are taken up. The ship starts crashing up. So now the problem comes. So this is peripetia, the sudden change of situation. Another best example would be the recent movie Drishyam. Mohanlal's movie Drishyam, you can see it's a very happy family, and as you can see here the husband, the wife, the children, they are leading a very good family life. But suddenly the wife has to commit a murder, and that was not a pre-planned action, but it's a necessity of the hour. So she had to murder a boy, and here comes the problem. And now on, the problem starts. So this is the sudden reversal of situation. So these are some of the examples. So hope you got the point, the sudden change of situation. Then comes anagnorisis. Now anagnorisis, as I've told you, it is the discovery of truth. So the best example that I can give you is from Game of Thrones. I don't know how many of you have watched this. At least you might have heard of this name, GOT, Game of Thrones. If you haven't watched it, it's my humble request that you should watch it. It's a beautiful series. You can watch it from Hotstar. It is available in Hotstar. So I'm just telling you one part of the story to make you understand this. Now this is, as the title suggests, Game of Thrones. It is all about trying to become the king or the queen. So now you can see this is a character named Daenerys Targaryen from Game of Thrones. Now she believes that she is the rightful heir to the throne. She comes from a family known as Targaryen family, and she is the only one person who remains in the Targaryen family. So she firmly believes that she is the rightful heir to the throne. But in a later stage, she realizes that there is another character named Jon Snow. So this is Jon Snow. She realizes that this Jon Snow is the rightful heir to the throne. So this comes as a discovery. So if you look at Game of Thrones, this is a story where you can see both peripetia and anagnorisis, because Jon Snow's parentage is not revealed in the initial part of the story, but it is only at the end of the story that his parentage is revealed. So when his parentage is revealed, it is a new discovery, the discovery of truth, and Daenerys realizes that she is not the rightful heir, but he is the rightful heir. So you can see both peripetia and anagnorisis coming in Game of Thrones. Again, one more example, Oedipus Rex, the play. Now I'm sure you might have heard about this play, the classic play written by Sophocles. Now Oedipus actually kills his father and marries his mother. Now he doesn't realize this, okay? So in the first part there is peripetia because he understands that his foster parents are not his real parents, because he was born and brought up as the prince, and his father is Polybus and his mother is Merope. So this is what he believes. But suddenly there is a change of situation, and it is revealed that he is not the biological son of Polybus or Merope, but he is actually an orphan. So this is peripetia, a sudden reversal of changes. So suddenly Oedipus understands that he is not from the family of kings and queens. That is the first change of situation. So now he starts conducting an investigation to realize who he actually is. And during this investigation, there is Anagnorisis coming because he realizes that he has killed his own father and married his own mother. He has killed his father, whose name is Laches, and he has married his mother, whose name is Jocasta. So this comes as a discovery of truth. So what happens here now is Peripeteia and Anagnorisis, both the terms are coming together in the play Oedipus Rex. So with this, we come to the end of this video lecture. So thank you very much for your patient listening. So we'll be coming back again with the next chapters from Aristotle's Poetics. If you have any doubt or if you need further explanation, please do not hesitate to connect with me in my email ID. So thank you very much. Thank you.